All right. So thank you everyone for joining the event today. So my name is Kun Peng. I'm currently pursuing a master's degree in management science and engineering at Stanford University. I'm also a vice president of Stanford Blockchain Club, and also a founding director of the Stanford Blockchain Accelerator Program. So we're trying to incubate Stanford-based startups in a more like crypto native way, to help the founders and builders from Stanford to further their career and their startup in crypto and convert as many Stanford students possible. That being said, today is kind of the part of the education series of the accelerator program, and it's a great honor today to have Stani, founder and CEO from AAVE. That being said, I will let Stani to do an introduction. So go ahead, Stani.
Yeah, hey everyone. So I'm Stani Kulechov, and I'm the founder and CEO of AAVE. And AAVE team is the one who deployed AAVE protocol, which is on-chain interest rate market, and currently one of the biggest DeFi protocols out there. Originally on Ethereum and now also on Polygon and Avalanche. So it's a cross-chain protocol that is also governed by its users. So the token holders basically decide on how the protocol is changed in the future. And it's one of the only protocols out there which is also governed in cross-chain fashion. So you can make a proposal on Polygon and vote on the proposal in layer 1, for example, and it's propagated via the bridges to execute in Polygon, for example. And I've been personally building smart contract based systems for the past 5 years, and started by very first project named ETHLend, short for Ethereum lending, which I don't know if any one of you remember that kind of like an old project, but something that I actually founded during my studies in University of Helsinki, Finland, where I originally come from. So it's just an interesting showcase that, you know, it doesn't matter like what background you have, you can always innovate and find ideas and build things. And at AAVE, we're kind of we're not DeFi builders, we're more of a Web3 builders. So we build decentralized finance and our Web3 protocols and give them into the community ownership. And you know, the way we work is pretty much, we have different kinds of product pods, and within those product pods, you know, you can spin up another product pod and start working on particular protocol and launch it to the public. And we are now also working a decentralized social graph at the same time, which we're pretty much finishing and deploying soon to the public, and NFTs as a collateral as a protocol as well, something similar that we have in AAVE in terms of like capital efficiency. And also recently we created so-called experimentations pods, where we try different kinds of smart contract based experimentations and see how they get traction, and part of that we also create tooling for the community. And yeah, that's a short introduction on myself and what we are doing at AAVE. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Stani, for the introduction of yourself and also of AAVE. So I think the flow of this event will be like, we have a list of questions that we collected ahead of time from Google Forms, and also we have prepared. So we'll ask the question there. And also later on, second part of the event, we'll open the floor for questions. And also when like Stani is talking or expressing certain points or views, if any questions, feel free to throw your question to the chat so we can get to it after in the second part. And also when we get to the second part of the audience, feel free to raise your hand and unmute yourself to ask a question there. That being said, seems like AAVE is kind of exploring, I mean, coming from the lending side, but also exploring different aspects like social graph and the empty as collateral, etc., which is quite interesting and exciting. So I think I want to start the question more on the lending side. So the question we have is like, do you have some kind of data on like the makeup of the borrowers on your platform, and what are their like primary reasons you have data, or otherwise what do you think for borrowing?
Yeah, so this is very, very, very interesting question, because like normally when you build financial products, you like, I mean, data is available, like data is important because of the fact that you can make better decisions, product decisions, market decisions, and so forth, economical decisions. And in Web3, like all of this data is available, all transaction is available. You can pretty much go into any state of the block and explore what kind of transaction there has happened. You can check what is the exposures of different protocols in terms of, let's say, debt, collateral ratios, the borrowing activity, and interpret that data. So like Web3 is all about data interpretation, whereas like Web2 and like the old TradFi is about more like the data collection, like as a first step, and then interpreting it and using it. And here we have like an ecosystem where everything is available for you, like as a default. So I think kind of like in terms of like just an example, like we recently hired a chief data scientist from Twitter, and kind of like created and did another hire on data science. So we're kind of starting to just expand our own data team. But for example, the early like observations that we have had, even things like cross-chain data, like for example, we have in Polygon, we have more users than we have actually in the layer 1, so more addresses interacting. But also, for example, the deposits, the supplying of the assets is way more smaller in terms of the amounts. So we see small 50, 100, up to $500 deposits, which are very frequent, which we don't see on layer 1 because of the gas cost, for example. So definitely, I would say that without analyzing data, you will not see this activity at all, because even if it's available, someone needs to do the work and interpret and understand like what we have here. And understanding the data will actually help you to create better and also more fair finance, but also more capital efficient and risk aware. So if you look at back in 2018, what happened with the economical meltdown, what we noticed is that it's very hard to understand what different kinds of exposures different financial institutions had against each other and the whole ecosystem in general. And first time ever in decentralized finance, we have all that visibility. So it means that we can actually create even better risk mitigation tools and use that data to create actually like better, more resilient finance. So this is something at AAVE we see data as part of the evidence that like we do evidence driven decisions, and data is just part of that. But also we're also working quite a lot by intuition and narratives. So there should be like different balance when you create products in general, but it should be like very supportive for what you are trying to achieve. Sometimes you can go against data. If the data shows you, what like something, you might have product decision to do something different, but especially it just gives you certainty what's happening out there. It's evidence as well.
Yeah, thank you for the answer. And I think you mentioned like the kind of like the importance of data, which can kind of lead to the next question, which is more very interesting and popular question or area that a lot of people work on is like under collateralized or no collateralized loan. I think AAVE is doing some sort of experimentation there. with credit delegation, that you can delegate your credit to other people. You have a lot of the credit. So what's your thought there? And also, I think in other talks you mentioned like also the data part, on-chain analysis as a potential way to create credit score. So what's your view of the evolution of where we are to the future? And there's going to be a sort of on-chain, off-chain combined approach or some other approaches?
Yeah, I mean, I think like all lending is some sort of type of a collateral. So let's say that, you know, in our protocol, the collaterals are cryptographic assets that are, you know, liquid. They have secondary markets where, you know, those assets are traded on a constant basis, like, you know, every day. And then when you're using, let's say, your reputation, it's also sort of a collateral that you're paid. You're always putting something like theoretically like skin in the game. But I think like the way to expand decentralized finance by itself is that now the focus is on like getting cryptographic dollars into the space, like dollars into cryptographic dollars, and get them yield in DeFi. And one of the interesting things is like how we can get the liquidity out of DeFi protocols into funding opportunities on chain. I guess against credit, or into completely real life, like real economy, and funding their like funding goals. And one of the things that we have already like noticed quite early at AAVE is that something like this will be the future, and it will come. And we implemented so-called credit delegation feature, where you could actually, when you deposit as a supplier into the protocol, what you can do is that after supplying the liquidity, you can actually delegate your borrowing power. So instead of yourself borrowing liquidity from the protocol out, what you can do is you delegate to someone else. That could be someone you trust, or a smart contract that can do one particular function, you know, draw liquidity from AAVE and supply somewhere else. Or it can be some sort of entity that is specifically like driven by a business model where they get credit delegations into a one world, and then let's say they draw stable coins, they convert them into dollars, and then fund real life, like real economy opportunities. So I guess like that's one way, and that entity then kind of like underwrites all those loans and further. So I think like the next step is to create more of a debt market, like outside of the AAVE protocol, based on the credit delegations, and then using that market to distribute the debt capital into these entities that are underwriting those that liquidity by funding them back into the economy. And I think that's where things become more interesting. And of course, like where more like innovation can come is the tooling part. And tooling is pretty much things like identity, credit scoring, you know, all this various ways to identify like funding abilities and opportunities. And I think that that's kind of like where I'm looking forward mostly, because you have all this data available on chain, and then, you know, you can capitalize it. And, you know, I sold recently an NFT where I sold the NFT where there was art, but also a promise if someone sends it back to me, and I will pay additional amount of ETH. And, you know, it's kind of like my reputation was staked there. So it was a successful under collateralized loan opportunity there. So definitely like that's coming in the future. I definitely would like to see more tools on that area.
Awesome. Thank you for the answer. Actually, as part of the accelerator program, we talked to a lot of Stanford students. Like in Stanford, we have this kind of spirit, entrepreneurial spirit, like everyone's doing some sort of a startup while being a student here. So there's actually a lot of people interested in like under collateralized or no collateralized loan or some kind of tooling. So it's very interesting. And also you mentioned like kind of the reputation, right? Being kind of one way to guarantee like credit worthiness. which kind of also related to another product portfolio that you guys are exploring that seemingly is quite different from lending, but I guess there's some tie with kind of the reputation, the social as reputation aspect, which is like social capital. So I just want to kind of to double click on this kind of the social media thing that AAVE is building, and what's your thought there? Seems like very, as I said before, very different line of products. But do you think that will merge eventually the lending side, or will evolve into something else?
Yeah, I personally think that, yeah, kind of like credit and everything. Like, I definitely think like what I'm most like excited about to see like networks, all this like trust graphs, trust networks come into place. And social graph is just one example where, I mean, the idea with social graph is that we take some part of the social media and turn it into public good. So for example, if you today go into Twitter and you log into Twitter and for some reason you are not anymore aligned with the principles or the way that the application works, or you see like some new application where the networks are evolving, you can't port your audience there. So you kind of are stuck within the platform. And the Web2 models definitely have a reason to do that, because when they lock audience in, what happens is that they, at the same time, they kind of like create a mode for themselves, for their platform. But in Web3, the idea is that, those particular networks belong to the communities and everyone owns their own network. And because of that, you're able to kickstart more innovation, because any developer, any part of the world could actually create better user experience, a better application, and without creating that, firstly, that infrastructure, but also that kind of like a network to succeed. And I think like once you have this social graph or some trust graph, you can turn a social graph into a trust graph relatively easily, because based on the transactioning and the relationships, you can create different kinds of ways of actually, first of all, you have data, you have the reputation, because you have something that people have built, and like they don't want to have, like tarnish their reputation in that way. So definitely it will become more of a use case for decentralized finance, especially for the AAVE protocol later. But on top of that, it's interesting to see like how these other people in your social graph could actually back you in different kinds of financial goals, and also backstop your financial transactions. So I guess like that's that would be like the way to like use social graph in decentralized finance. And the beautiful part about Web3 is that everything is pretty much like on the same network. So like all the smart contracts are kind of like interoperable. So whatever you build in the creator economy, NFT communities, those smart contracts can talk with the DeFi smart contracts. And that's what makes like the composability makes this whole system very exciting field. And they always will, whatever you build, like everything will come together.
Yeah, thank you. I think it makes a lot of sense. I see that like more data, as you mentioned before, it collect and then analyze, and that can form sort of a trust worthiness that can definitely help with other, like for instance, under collaterals loan as well, as more data you collect for creating some sort of like credit score. So now I just want to switch gear a bit to kind of talk about institutional side, since AAVE is like so big that you have a lot of different lines of product. So I know like AAVE has kind of the AAVE ARC, which is one you guys have for institutions. And I think recently, based on what I read from Twitter, like the Fire Blocks just submitted like a AAVE improved proposal to be the very first white lister on the AAVE ARC market. So just wanted you to kind of probably talk about it a little bit more. And also, what's your view on the institutional adoption of DeFi? What are the challenges, biggest challenges, and how can we potentially solve those challenges?
Yeah, like for me, the AAVE arc is amazing experimentation on the institutional frontier. And I'm like looking very forward, like how, because essentially how it differs is that it's the very much same technology we have on the other markets, but technically the only difference is that we have this whitelister functionality. So kind of like the governance can vote whitelisters, and of course the ARC market is completely segregated liquidity, and whitelisters can actually whitelist depositors, borrowers, and liquidators into the market, which means that you can add higher compliance requirements or other requirements on particular market. So anyone can like spin off a new AAVE ARC market. And this first one is done like together with Fireblocks. So they initiated the whole idea, the process, and everything. And what it means that the idea here is that Fireblocks starts to list their users, which are institutional users that want to use DeFi, but they just cannot do it in the way it's today in the permissionless fashion. They will tomorrow, but that's not the reality now. And what's cool about this is that you can add different kinds of requirements with the whitelisting. So it's not only about, KYC requirements. There might be other requirements. You can create completely new ARC market with just, accepting illiquid collaterals that might not have, secondary markets in the DeFi ecosystem, but they might have value and claim in real life. And what's nice here is that things become interesting when you can add more whitelisters. So when you add, let's say, another bank or another financial institution into the ARC market, and you get more kind of like a widespread market, and you have counterparties, because what you have with our ARC market, you have most of the DeFi properties, which is transparent markets with the public blockchain, Ethereum. You have the Ethereum security. You also have the smart contract based execution, which means that transactions will self-execute, and the AAVE team or anyone else can't come in between that transactioning. And of course, you have still composability, because you can whitelist smart contracts as well, which then means that you can create like kind of like ARC type of market for Uniswap and elsewhere, and you create this interesting permissioned sandbox environment. And I think it's a good experiment to see like how institutions would get excited about DeFi, and over the long run they can be ported back to the permissionless market.
Great. Yeah, thank you for sharing your thoughts on the institution side. And then also another kind of question or interesting thing that's going on, since like a lot of the layer 1 protocols like Solana, Avalanche are gaining a lot of attractions. And so you also mentioned earlier, like AAVE has kind of this vision or plan to work on multiple blockchains, and you have the governance also cross-chain. So what's your view of kind of the future of the multiple blockchain, whether Ethereum will be the big dominant or we'll have multiple? And also another thing, since we are seeing today, is although the value or market cap, I don't know if it's a good indicator of those layer 1s are very high, but seems like the protocols building on it are not that high. So what's your view there?
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I mean, well, like first of all, I think like kind of like for AAVE, we see all the different layers and different networks as economies and ecosystems. You could compare it to something like cities. You have Ethereum that is the Manhattan, and then you might have, let's say, you have Polygon that is like, let's say, upstate New York, and you have less congestion traffic there, and then you have some other network that represents like might be completely desert, that everything needs to be built, you know, and there's different kind of or just like up and coming economy. And what's cool about this whole idea is that, you know, like multiple network is totally fine, because, you know, you diversify the network risk, of course, but also like if you solve the transactioning between all of these networks, you know, that helps people to kind of like flying from one city to another and have this like traveling and choose the networks. Like definitely that's interesting. And also like later ones by themselves, I think they will become more of like a network security lending protocols, like lending networks. So for example, I could imagine that Ethereum 2 years from now is just focusing on lending security to other networks because it has like strong security, let's say with the network value and everything, meaning that, let's say if you are layer 2 and you want to settle your transaction somewhere, if you use Ethereum, you have a pricing that you apply there when you are storing the hash of the state of your network there. And I think like that's the kind of like future. So, you know, you don't actually transact on Ethereum that much unless, you know, you have to. So much of the transactioning is mainly about storing hashes. That's what I think. Then you have the question about value within an ecosystem. It will definitely be clear that in Ethereum, for example, you have more value and will have multiplied times more value than you have the security. This is like, because let's say if you have an example of a city, you know, you might have like a lot of security, but you don't actually have for every single transactioning and incident if it would happen at the same time. So essentially, like there's definitely the game theory that, you know, if you can get the underlying network, you can get every asset out of the system, but doing that also hurts the system as a general. And I think, you know, those to whom it might be more concerning, I think we will just see more networks pop out as kind of like where you can diversify. And I see that already happening in some way where, you know, you want to transact in multiple networks. But I don't see it that of a big issue. I think like the value of the Ethereum network is the cost of the security that you're applying on transactioning. And I don't see it as an issue of actually securing more value than you know, the ecosystem itself. I think it's an interesting like research topic, and, you know, kind of like research a bit this area a bit more, because it's very valuable information to everyone, I would say.
Yeah, thank you for the answer. Yeah, it seems like this area is becoming really hot, like multiple chain, and also like cross chain bridges and how to interoperate. It's like maybe some of the students listening could work on some potential startup ideas there. So actually the audience, like people in the audience, feel free to prepare questions or raise your hand. I only have one more question from like pre-collected or prepared list. So the last question we have is like, since this is part of the education series of the accelerator program, and in Stanford, a lot of people work on startups. So, and you live basically in the frontier of a crypto world that changes really fast, the speed of light. So what's your view of some interesting ideas that might not be possible or not very actively being worked on, that in probably like few months or 6 months, that will become very interesting because some enabler or some like L2 become like more scalable, mature, that you think students can potentially explore and work on as your full-time startup idea?
So basically, I think in terms of like, I think it's just like broader focusing maybe on things where might not be like, there's like cryptos are quite narratives in general. Like you have all the time different narratives going on, like sometimes the focus is on, let's say, on DAOs buying, constitution, sometimes it'd be something else, might be on stable coins. But I think like once you find something that is very useful for like wider community, you should definitely like see how big of an issue and how impactful the solution could be and work on that. Like it doesn't need to be something that really needs to be solved exactly today. You can work on something for a longer period of time and deploying it and, kind of like reiterating the idea and trying to make it more workable. So that's the kind of like a way to do it. I think like one big area is like risk management and risk in general. Like kind of like there's a lot of opportunities there where you can create products. And what's cool about like risk management is that not only you can build like useful products for the DeFi ecosystem, but you can also build products that couldn't exist before because there wasn't so much data transparency, and build better financial risk management products than ever before. That's one particular area. And I tend to help quite a lot in terms of like things that are built on top of AAVE, like if it's some sort of like, because AAVE is itself, the AAVE protocol is, it's a base layer of lending and borrowing, and everything that can be built on top that uses that functionality is very fascinating to me, because I think decentralized building is where, everyone like contributes in building one piece of a block, and then you have this very cool, like a bigger, universe. And that's where like I definitely think you can do a lot of things in terms of credit swaps, interest rate swaps, of course, and also like thinking like how NFTs will play in the DeFi ecosystem. But also like it can be beyond that. It doesn't need to be necessarily finance related or NFTs related. It's just an area that hasn't been researched much. And depending, of course, on your interest, like there is technologies that are just like unexplored and very novel. That might be, for example, ZK technology, how to use it, use cases, and whatever you build doesn't need to be very, big or like kind of like, it might be just one interesting hack or solution. And most importantly, the coolest thing is that when you can build with friends, so the more you can share, the projects that you're working upon and get more people to join, the stronger the impactful that particular project will be. And it also allows you to avoid working in silo and kind of like being that way. So whatever you work upon, and if you have some ideas, I'm definitely happy to help and brainstorm and make things happen. And especially if it's related to DeFi or social or the NFT economy.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Stani, for the answer and the willingness to help like Stanford ecosystem startups. So now we'll switch to live questions. So I just want to kind of go down the order. I think we'll go to Andy first, and maybe Akshay later, as he raised a hand too. So Andy, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself or ask live question. Otherwise, I can just read your question.
Yeah, sure. So thanks for talking to us today. And I was curious, so I know the protocol control liquidity is kind of a big movement right now, and was curious what AAVE's plans are. It seems like there's AAVE has like 27 billion liquidity, so it's like quite a move to kind of capture even like a % of that, with like bonds maybe or whatever, Olympic style. But does that really matter? It seems like liquidity is still pretty high regardless. So I'm just curious to your thoughts.
So you can repeat that? The end of that?
Yeah. So basically, like, what are your plans for protocol controlled liquidity? And I guess like how important is that right now to you?
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's the one you asked. Yeah, that's a good question, Andy. I think like I think like more and more we will move towards protocol controlled liquidity, because essentially like what you can have is that you can have different kinds of efficient strategies that these like DAOs can actually do. And like there's of course like the native token element that you can basically create inflation and different kinds of like economical modeling there. But also I think it's just like more flexible way of bringing capital efficiency. So that's like definitely important part and future, and it gives more leverage for the DAO itself, to compete, whatever is the aim there. So like that's definitely something that is very important. But one thing, like kind of like, some of the DeFi protocols that you can build, you can actually build without any outside contributions. You can create some sort of a stable coin without actually getting like suppliers to supply collaterals and whatnot, and create completely without this kind of like a functioning that you operate between DAOs and AMMs and lending protocols. But then like there's this kind of like a question of like the network effect. So if you have users, you have suppliers, you have depositors, or whatever is the product, that brings a lot of network effect there. And protocol control value, especially if you can govern it, is one of those that actually can activate those network effects. But I think definitely it's something very important. And I think like we kind of like still underestimate how big these DAOs can be. So now many of these DAOs hold liquidity worth of a few million, few hundred million, some of them have a billion and few. But in the future, like these protocols can actually hold trillions worth of value. And they can even fund nations. Like it's just like how far you want to take those like ideas and vision. But I definitely think it's very important kind of a step and with every DAO, and it's just part of the strategy that the DAO can yield for its own community users. And that's in terms of AAVE. I think that's like kind of like what we're thinking now within the community, like how we can move to something where we can use token economics. Like now there is protocol controlled like value, but it's used on incentives. But for example, there isn't capital that it's, let's say, deployed directly to an AMM to bootstrap liquidity or anything like that. So definitely there's that aspect that the community is now thinking at AAVE. And now if I will build a new product in AAVE that needs scaling and has a strong DAO element there, definitely like the protocol control value is something I would want to have.
Right. Thank you for the answer. The next is Akshay. Go ahead.
Hey, Stani. I've been thinking a bit about under collateralized lending over the past few days, and I'm kind of curious what you think are the primary use cases of under collateralized lending versus over collateralized lending. Like, as in, what kind of borrowers do you think would benefit from this, and how would that affect the volume of borrowing as a whole if this were to become a thing?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Just curious how you think what the primary use cases of under collateralized borrowing are. So like what kind of borrowers would benefit from this? What kind of use cases do you see? Because I see y'all are sort of moving into this area with the whole credit delegation thing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like the primary use case is that you can finance goals, and then when you do that, you can also like require other kinds of collaterals than liquid collaterals, and also you kind of like expand the area that you finance. And of course, like for liquidity providers perspective, you can attract more yield when there's more risk involved in those opportunities. I think that's the kind of value loop between the suppliers and then those borrowers. And of course, like if you can make it more impactful, that you can take liquidity from DeFi and finance goals in traditional finance, that will be very interesting, especially in the emerging economies.
Do you envision the volume of borrowing increasing significantly if something like this were to be developed, or do you think it wouldn't be that big?
I think so. I mean, the thing is that networks in Web3, like they propagate very slowly, but quite firmly. So, I mean, there's projects like ENS that has been around for a few years, and like the most biggest growth has been happening for the past, 12 months or so. It just showcased the same for like POAP, and like there's this kind of like a tendency that Web3 networks doesn't need to grow so fast, but over time they can become very powerful when they prove themselves. So I think that it's very valuable to have under collateralized lending in DeFi, definitely.
So, thank you. Next, David, feel free to unmute yourself.
Thank you so much for giving the presentation. Super interesting stuff. I guess I was wondering if you have any specific comments about decentralized futures, especially since at this point they still seem to appear to have an order book style format, but Uniswap and AAVE, when they switch over to this kind of liquidity pool idea, I was wondering if you see a future like that for futures, or if you have any comments in general on the decentralized futures market.
Yeah, I think so. Like, decentralized futures is definitely like very interesting idea, especially like from the hedging perspective, but also kind of like improving the market liquidity. Of course, like kind of like the idea is that you need to, because it's so active trading, you need to have market makers. So you probably will do it in some sort of side chain or layer 2, I would say.
Mm-hmm. All right, thanks so much.
All right, thank you. Emmanuel, go ahead. Yourself.
Thanks again for being here, Stani. I actually had a question, not about the future, but kind of in the past. I know that AAVE actually has like a money business license from the UK. And I've been really curious about, when you started out as this like crypto native thing, what was the process of interacting with a real world government and convincing them to, like operate as a legitimate entity?
Yeah, I mean, so for example, the EMI, it's a kind of like a separate project for us. So it's like building actually a business on top of a protocol, and it's, I don't know, like kind of like we're like software, development team. So of course, like the interaction is different than, creating smart contracts, auditing them and deploying into the mainnet. It's definitely different. But also I would say that, I mean, it's just a different kind of a process, I would say. Like, it's just like, there's sort of compliance related to that. It's, let's say I just prefer to build things.
Fair enough. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. William?
Hi, Stani. Thank you so much for being here today. Just a quick question about AAVE V3. Can you just share more about, what's the developmental framework you were thinking about when coming up with this entire and, quite revolutionary proposal?
On the V3, right?
Yes, the V3, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, V3 is very interesting because, it's kind of, it's basically a big improvement for version 2, what we have. And like technically, in terms of different gas costs that we have in function calls, but also it's very risk averse protocol. So we have different kinds of caps, we have depth caps there, we have supply caps, and we have like siloed pairs. So basically a new asset can be listed into the protocol without exposing it to the all collaterals. So you can borrow against an asset without, like in a silo from all the other collaterals. And of course, like this is very interesting, but we also have so-called high efficiency mode, meaning that you can go, up to 98% LTV in assets that are very correlated in their volatility. For example, you can borrow 98% against, let's say, another stable coin, or ETH against staked ETH. And it's very interesting when you have euro pound and other stable coins, because it means that you could actually have like high leverage foreign exchange trading as well. So that's very cool thing. And yeah, and of course we have this kind of a portal system where, you know, a bridge or any other entity can become a port, which means you can mint and burn A tokens in a permission fashion. So for example, I could, for example, deploy, I could actually, as a bridge, I could, you know, take A tokens, burn them, and mint them on another chain in a permission fashion up to a certain depth cap. So this allows new use cases where you can actually, you could, for example, you know, you can put a collateral in layer 1, borrow in Polygon, and repay the loan in Avalanche, and you have this like cross-chain lending functionality. It really creates a lot of cool stuff in cross-chain composability.
Thank you.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, like, what DAO or NFT projects are you following right now and excited about? I'm curious if there are any specific trends with those projects.
There's actually so many, you know, I try to avoid shilling too much, but I don't know. I like the fact that it's happening around DAOs, you know, that things such as, you know, makes voting easier, governance easier, more gas efficient. But in general, I mean, DAOs essentially, there might be either a multi-sig or just larger way of group of people to come together. You know, I mean, AAVEs DAO, you know, there's sub DAOs, there's Kron's DAO, there's Risk DAO that is coming out as well, which I'm quite excited actually. But in general, in Web3, like, it's just, you know, there's something new every single moment. So, you know, I just don't know which one of them to shill, but, you know, I think I'm just like super excited. People are finding DAOs as a way to, you know, build together and coordinate together. And same for NFT projects, you know, it's just like so many things are happening now. And I'm most excited about NFTs that might have some sort of like a yield function there, or some sort of additional utility.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know, Akshay, you have more questions since I used to have your hands raised. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, I just forgot to take that down.
Okay, and William, you good?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, so feel free to ask any other question you have in the chat. I did get a question, like a DM me. Like, what's your thought on like adoption, mass adoption in the kind of the developing countries, and what's the AAVE's effort there, doing any initiative there?
I think mass adoption, you know, like, of course, like one idea is that you can get yield. So that's like very universal thing to do. But I think like more bigger adoption where we're trying to solve and look into is universal basic income, and understand like how that might happen and be more reality. And blockchain as kind of like as a distributed like databases could be, and very accessible, could be a way of making that happen. You know, if you can figure out a system where, you know, anyone, any part of the world could just generate, you know, Ethereum address or address in another chain and you know, start earning, that's like something which is very interesting in, of course, like semi-Sybil resistant fashion. So I think like, I don't think we're still yet there in DeFi getting like this kind of like a bigger impact, but I think we will see at some point some innovation.
Cool. Actually, there's a question. Do you want to unmute yourself, Ian?
Hi. Yeah. Thanks for joining us today. So I should preface my question here with, I'm very new to the blockchain space. My background is more in AI. When I look at blockchain right now, I don't see equivalent infrastructure to something like Spark, and even Spark's difficult to use, but it's not particularly easy to fire up Python and fire up TensorFlow and hey, let's go here. Do you know what tools are available and what tools that you're using, for one, which reflects my ignorance? And then for two, what sorts of challenges are you having with those tools? And I ask this because you mentioned that you have a data science team.
Yeah, so tools specifically related to data?
Yeah, tools to pulling the data off the chain,
Yeah.
analyzing it in a sensible way, building graphs out of it. You know, anything you'd want to do that I would call as pre-processing before you make any sort of sense out of the data.
Yeah, good question. I mean, like, it's definitely like what we are using is you know, we use something like the graph for getting data and kind of like understanding it. I mean, pre-processing, for example, and we do like use something like yeah, Nanten is good. We use Dune Analytics as well, where, you know, you can build dashboards and analyze things and already kind of like start interpreting from there. But there isn't like, I mean, honestly, like the whole data area is very, very still like young and immature. So that's what we are doing mostly. And I think kind of like now our focus is to kind of like build systems that we can get the data we need and make it in a format where we can analyze it very relatively easy. I think Dune Analytics is doing it pretty well. We have some dashboards as well at AAVE that we're using frequently. So, but yeah, I think there should be more stuff towards that.
Cool. Okay, thank you.
All right. Yeah, thank you for answering all the questions and being here today. So the last, since we're almost like at 9 o'clock or 5 o'clock at UK time zone, wondering if you have like any last words to share with the students, like departing thoughts. Stani?
On my side, I would say that, you know, it's amazing that you all are here. You know, it's definitely everyone is kind of like early in the space. And when I started 5 years ago, you know, things were super early. I would say that's kind of like, you know, many of the things that you want to build or are thinking about, you know, if there's some challenges, I'm happy to help. But in general, you know, like the best way to do is just explore things and you know, get feedback and also think of like DeFi ecosystem as a place where everyone contributes. So it's an open system and you're always contributing to something where everything turns into a public good. So remember that side. And also, I don't know like how active everyone is, but being active in governance is a very cool thing to do. So, you know, participating through the you know, the blockchain kind of like association in here, or you know, personally as well. So definitely that's something very important. So like I can always show more and more governance, because that's where you know, we need more things. And yeah, it was super nice to be here. I'm super happy to have these discussions and kind of present what we are doing at AAVE. And if anyone has some additional questions, you can always reach me out on Twitter. So here's my handle, and yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stani, for being here. Thank you everyone for joining the event. Right.
Thank you.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye.